Highbridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Once in a Blue Moon Lodge, a novel, by Lorna Landvik, read by Anne-Marie Lee. Prologue. On the day my grandmother got arrested, I found out I was pregnant, with triplets. Yikes! Knowing there was no way to alter its pass-fail grade with extra credit, I was lightheaded and sweaty taking the home pregnancy test, and when the wand's little plus sign glowed, indicating my passing mark, I sat slumped on the edge of the tub, feeling a roiling mixture of terror and glee. I had long wanted to start a family, but I wanted one the old-fashioned way, married to the dad, the two of us united in love for each other, as well as our upcoming bundle of joy. As it was, the baby's father and I had been united, but only once, in a sleeping bag that smelled of fried trout and wood smoke. 2 days after my home test result, I visited the gynecologist, who breathed in a little gasp as she looked at the fuzzy sonogram screen. No matter the size, a gasp is generally not something you want to hear coming out of the mouth of your healthcare professional. When she described the blurry shadows, I gasped. Turns out that bundle of joy was plural. "Hey, Nora, meet the jailbird," said Patty Jane as I staggered into the kitchen, the rug, the floor, the earth itself having just been yanked out from under me. "Jailbird," scoffed my grandmother. "We weren't behind bars. They just had us in a little room. Ione says Crabby's only regret was that the arresting officer didn't frisk her. Yeah, she said he reminded her of the first boy she ever kissed." Shaking her head, my mother said, "Imagine the damage inflicted on that poor guy." Their conversation was not helping my rising discombobulation, and I reached for the most used appliance in our household, the coffee pot. After pouring myself a cup, I sat down at the table and asked them to kindly give me a clue as to what they were talking about. "Nora, today was the gun shop sit-in, remember?" said Grandma, in the light Norwegian accent that turned her sentences into little songs. "And we got arrested for trespassing." Not content to be a master grandmother, Ione was a founder of OBFC, Old Bags for Change, a group of seniors whose goals were no less lofty than worldwide peace and justice for all. Still, she found time in her rabble-rousing to bake, and it was a plate of her most recent offering, thin as brittle sugar cookies, that she pushed in my direction. "Nora, what's wrong?" asked Patty Jane when I failed to help myself to that which I usually found irresistible. I stared into my cup with the intensity of a tea-leaf reader, but no answers were revealed, as it was filled with coffee. Knowing there was no other way to say what I had to say than to say it, I sighed as heavily as a convict at another denied parole meeting. "I'm expecting triplets." "Triplets of what?" said Patty Jane, helping herself to a cookie. "Triplets of babies." There was an odd flurry in the air, as if the molecules and atoms had been stirred up, and for a brief moment we were taken outside of that cheerful kitchen and into another dimension where time stood still and space swirled. "Whose babies?" asked Patty Jane, the hand that had taken a cookie frozen in air. "Mine," I said. "I'm pregnant. With triplets." Palms splayed across her chest, my grandmother whispered a fervent, "Uftameda." There's no real translation for her favorite phrase. Depending on its emphasis, it could be as mild as oh my, or as explicit as any curse word. Ione never swore, but in this case the inference was there. Patty Jane, however, never bothered with inference. "Holy shit, Nora!" Remembering that long-ago day, I write, family stories shouldn't be treated like heirloom china or antique ornaments, carefully wrapped in tissue paper to be brought out only for holiday display. They're meant for everyday use, like favorite recipes or faded patchwork quilts. Stained or torn, they offer sustenance and comfort. I drum my pencil furiously on the paper, pockmarking it with graphite. My goal is to compile a book of family stories for my girl's 18th birthday, but I've crossed out as many words as I've left in. Recalling the thrilling and scary day the gynecologist told me I was carrying a trio has made me wonder, how much do I leave in and how much of the story do I leave out? Sena would prefer the unabridged version, complete with interviews, footnotes, and graphics. Grace would like only those tales featuring love and truth and harmony, but I'd like to offer them something a little bigger than a brochure. Ula would encourage me to mine for the jokes, or failing that, to sex it up. I read what I've just written to my mother. "Very nice," she says, looking at me through her sunglasses. "But I don't get it." "What do you mean you don't get it?" "Well, we've never treated our family stories like heirloom china or old ornaments. Antique ornaments, I say, miffed, because I know she's right. And it isn't as if you've hidden much from the girls, just as I hope I never hid much from you, just as Grandma never hid—" "Oh, wait," I say, and we both laugh. It's a beautiful June afternoon, and we're out on the deck, facing the ocean, which glitters with sunshine. Lounging beside me on a chaise longue, my mother looks like a cover girl, and I tell her so. "Yeah, right. For AARP, maybe." She adjusts her sun hat. In the battle against Gray, Patty Jane is a soldier who has never fallen, and I know she wants to protect her latest dye job. Looking back at the words on my legal pad, I sigh and write, in our family, strangeness, while not necessarily the rule, is not necessarily the exception either. When I share this insight with my mother, she hoots. "Well, what do you expect? You're telling stories about a family." It'd just be easier if ours were a little more normal. Well, you know what Tolstoy said? All normal families are alike. Each abnormal family is nuts in its own way. Good one, Ma. I'm sure he'd appreciate the new translation. She shrugs. I never really understood the original quote. Why does he think that all happy families are alike, but unhappy ones are unique in their unhappiness? Isn't it all sort of fluid? A happy family on a Wednesday can be miserable as hell by the weekend. So you think I should write about everything? Uncensored? Pushing down her sunglasses, my mother raises one eyebrow. Right, I say. You're the last person I should ask about censoring oneself. Just tell whatever you want to tell in whatever way you want to tell it. But how do I start? I ask, my voice skipping back a few decades to reclaim an attractive prepubescent whine. Tapping her chin, Patty Jane looks out at the sparkling water. How about... Last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again. Hearing my sigh, she adds, Okay, then what about... It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Thanks a lot, Mom. "You know me," she says, leaning back on the chaise longue and offering herself up to the afternoon sun. "Always happy to help." I drum my pencil on the legal pad once, twice, 3,000 times. Leave it to Dickens to have already used a line that perfectly summed up practically anyone's story, including ours. It really was the best of times and the worst of times. Part 1. Chapter 1. Winter 1988. Patty Jane Rolvaag was middle-aged, and though she had lived through enough drama to fuel a hit Broadway show, she was lovely, without the qualifiers still or for her age. The swaggering co-host of Babs and Boyd in the Morning certainly thought so, putting moves on her more appropriate at a singles bar than in a television studio. That Boyd Burroughs was a former football player and sportscaster out of his element when interviewing anyone who didn't wear a helmet or jockstrap was immaterial. Bad manners were bad manners. "There'll be a lot of sniffles when this beloved neighborhood institution closes its doors at the end of the year," he said, reading the teleprompter copy. "Yes, it'll soon be the end of both pin curls and programs at Patty Jane's House of Curl, etc., the unique salon within a salon, a place where the client's interior gets as much attention as her exterior." The hulking man whose brawn tested the seams of his Italian-made suit turned away from the camera and aimed his killer white smile at his guest. "I have no idea what a salon within a salon is, but let's meet its proprietor, who I have to say has taken pretty good care of her exterior." Punctuating his words with a little wink, he added, "Welcome to the show, Patty Jane." Returning his wink, Patty Jane said, "Thanks, Boyd," and in her head she added, "You big ape." To her staff and clientele, tuning into the show's popular Neighborhood Legends segment, the announcement of the closing of the House of Curl, etc., was no surprise, having been advised of it by Patty Jane weeks earlier. They had reacted with tears, pleas to reconsider, and in Crabby Bultram's case, threats to sabotage its sale by telling any prospective buyers that A, the smell of permanent wave solution was indeed permanent, embedded in the walls and especially noticeable on hot summer days. B, the property was one termite bite away from collapse, or C, the place was cursed. There was no truth to A and B, and Patty Jane had been quick to correct C. Had been. The always prepared and professional half of Babs and Boyd, felled by a sudden flu, had called in sick that morning, leaving Patty Jane to deal with the half whose preference was to wing it. As usual, Boyd Burroughs hadn't read his prep sheet, and as Patty Jane tried to tell the story of the House of Curl, etc., he constantly interrupted her. "What? It all started when your husband Thor went missing?" "Yes, and with him gone, I had to figure out a way to make money, so I opened Patty Jane's House of Curl and operated it out of my home." "I thought it was Patty Jane's House of Curl, etc.," said Boyd, in a tone suggesting his guest was confused. "We added etc. to the name when we had the opportunity many years later to move the salon into a much bigger place. Knowing that she would need a lot longer than her 5-minute allotment to explain the admittedly strange and complicated history of her salon, Patty Jane instead changed tack and began listing some of the events the etc. had hosted. "We've had musical and dance recitals, talks given by everyone from an astronaut to a zoologist." "What? An astronaut gave a talk in your beauty parlor?" Our lecture and performance series has attracted a wide range of interesting people. Yeah, but wouldn't that sort of be a come-down for an astronaut to speak in front of a bunch of ladies getting their hair done? We don't hold the events in the actual beauty salon, said Patty Jane, keeping her voice light and forcing her eyeballs not to roll. The House of Curl, etc., has different rooms for those. Finally, Boyd Burroughs gave up, deciding to focus on that which he knew he understood: seduction, proceeding to make suggestive comments about beauty operators and wanting to be swiveled in your chair. But when he leaned into Patty Jane, asking if she'd like to run her fingers through his hair, she said, "No thanks, but I wouldn't mind putting my hands around your neck." "That was priceless," said Paige Larkin, who'd watched the live broadcast that morning. "The look on his face." Patty Jane shook her head. "And get this, off the air, he still asks me out to dinner." "No. What did you say?" "I said I make it a point to never dine with patronizing pinstriped TV show dumbasses who give lousy, unprepared interviews and then try to pick up their guests." The cold air turned Paige's chortle into a stutter of vaporous clouds. "At least you're laughing," said Patty Jane, taking her friend's arm. "That's good." A gust of icy wind blew Paige's thin cashmere coat against her legs. Even in freezing weather, she saw no reason to abandon style, and besides, both menopause and the rage she felt toward her philandering husband were a combination that worked to keep her body temperature set on high. "I thought I had learned how to live with humiliation," Paige said. "But when he got together with this one, it was just too much." He was her husband, Spencer Larkin, and this one was a 24-year-old employee at their country club. "She wasn't even that good a waitress. She would always get my order wrong, and yet there Spence'd be tipping her 30%. The two women walked up to Lake Street, crossed the bridge to St. Paul, and followed the river south, and by the time they'd gone over the Ford Bridge back to Minneapolis, Paige, whose monologue had been punctuated by everything from tears to vitriol, felt as if she'd been in a deep and productive therapy session. Patty Jane felt in need of a strong cup of coffee with a brownie chaser. Back home, on a November afternoon whose gloom had settled in as both color and mood, Patty Jane stood leaning against a doorframe, not seeing the forest of birdhouses displayed in the rectangular space, but what had filled the room years ago: the rinse sinks, the hair-dryers, her sister's harp. Harriet had been dead for nearly 20 years. But there were still moments when an aching loneliness spread through Patty Jane like an emotional rheumatism. It had been Paige's parting remarks that had ignited a memory triggering this flare-up of sadness. And now to find out Spence and his girlfriend have been using our family's cabin as their love nest? How could they? That was my refuge. Tens of thousands of Minnesotans own these refuges, with many of them passed down through generations. But there was no deed to a lakeside cabin in Patty Jane's family. Her parents' worldly possessions were few at their deaths, both related to decades-long alcoholism, and their orphaned daughters had had the sad task of picking through the Dobbins' meager estate. "If empties were money," Patty Jane said as they cleaned up the tiny kitchen, "we'd be zillionaires." Anna had outlived Elmo by only 4 months, and by the vast collection of beer and gin bottles, it appeared she had been drinking with the goal of joining him as fast as she could. "Poor Ma," said Harriet. "Poor is right." The sympathy coloring her sister's voice was not present in her own. Patty Jane was not cold-hearted. She had loved her parents, but knew they had willingly taken up the shovels that dug their own ditches and used others' sympathy as an excuse to keep digging rather than as a ladder to help themselves climb out. Years later, when Harriet fell into her own alcoholic morass, experience had taught Patty Jane that while she could extend a helping hand, she couldn't force her sister to grab hold of it. Family vacations had been few and far between. Parents who like to escape in drunken fogs rarely have the impetus or energy to take trips that involve more planning than figuring out whose turn it is to go to the liquor store. But one summer the Dobbins had managed to make the drive up to a small family-owned resort on Lake Osakis. For 2 days of bliss, Patty Jane and Harriet were regular kids with regular parents who dove off an old wooden dock and paddled around in a dented aluminum canoe and batted a birdie over a sagging badminton net. The first night they went into town for drive-in hamburgers. The second night, after the sun settled into its pink and red blanket, they roasted marshmallows, although the girls, impatient, blistered them black and sang songs around the campfire. The voices of Patty Jane and Elmo were serviceable, but it was obvious that Harriet's musical genius was fruit plucked from her mother's side of the family tree. When the two of them began singing Home on the Range, Patty Jane thought, "There's no family I'd rather be in than this one." It was an unfamiliar sentiment, but its truth filled her with a calm and complete happiness. Leaning against her father's shoulder, she looked across the campfire, watching the leaping stalagmites of flame light her mother's and sister's faces. Anna and Harriet played with the harmony, tossing it back and forth as if it were a toy. The long light of summer had waned into darkness, and the lake behind them was invisible to the eye, but not to the nose, smelling pine-tinged and fishy. "How about You Are My Sunshine?" called out a voice from a nearby cabin. "They've already got a fan club," whispered Elmo to Patty Jane as the singers honored the stranger's request. When they were done, another voice called out, "How about Sentimental Journey?" And after they'd sung that, another voice asked for The Man I Love. After a whispered conference, Anna called out, "My daughter doesn't know the lyrics to that one, but here's one for you." And the two launched into the campfire classic Red River Valley. Hours later, the sound of breaking glass was an ugly coda to the evening of music. "Good one," said Anna, her lovely singing voice now thick and coarsened with drink. "Shut up," said Elmo. "Shut up and give me another one." "Patty Jane," whispered Harriet, fear ripping away the gauze of sleep. "Patty Jane, are they—" "Yes," she answered, and in the narrow log-framed bed they shared in the dark rental cabin, the sisters held each other, their puny armor against what raged outside. More interior sulk and ruminate drunks, the girls' parents rarely fought. But that night had them screaming and yelling, and people in the other cabins, those who hours earlier had thanked Anna and Harriet for the lovely concert, were now screaming and yelling back. "Shut up! Go to bed and sleep it off! What's the matter with you? These are family cabins." Elmo, who sober had the soul of a gentle man, got into a fist fight with a vacationing pipe fitter from Eau Claire, a fight he lost, which left him with a bloody nose and a shiner that would swell so that his eye was a mere slit in a ripe purple plum. The resort owner broke up the fight, and the family Dobbin was forced to leave the next morning. Anna and Elmo hung over and miserable. Patty Jane and Harriet just miserable. "Mom? Jesus Christ," said Patty Jane. "Don't sneak up on me." "Ma, it's not like I tiptoed in." Nora gestured to the clogs she was wearing. "Anyway, sorry." Copying her mother's pose, she leaned against the other side of the doorframe and folded her arms across her chest. "So, neighborhood legend, I taped your segment. You want to watch it?" "No. I'm in a lousy enough mood as it is." "Oh, Ma, of course you are. You announced on local TV that we're closing down. That makes it official." "Yeah, I guess. Are you having second thoughts? Maybe third and fourth thoughts?" said Patty Jane, her mouth lifting in more a shrug than a smile. "But no, it's the right time." "So you're in a bad mood because—" "Oh, it was just something Paige said about her family cabin being her refuge. It made me think about the one time our parents took Harriet and me to this little resort." Aware of her mother's fractious childhood, Nora said, "Well, that sounds nice." "Hanson's Haven," said Patty Jane, brightening as she remembered the resort's name. And it was nice, till it wasn't. And then you know how it is. One thought leads to another, and suddenly— Patty Jane nodded to a corner of the room. "I'm seeing Harriet sitting over there, playing the beer barrel polka for Gudrun's birthday request." "Oh, I remember those. She played Last Train to Clarksville for my 12th birthday. I doubt there are many harpists who play the monkeys. Or the beer barrel polka." Patty Jane's chest lifted and fell in a deep sigh, but it signaled a finale to her gloom, not its continuation. She was equipped with an internal alarm that sounded when emotions threatened to get out of control, or in this case, when sadness needed to be turned off before it soured into moping. "Say, did you see this?" Taking her daughter's hand, Patty Jane led her into the maze of birdhouses. "Your dad just brought it up. It's a replica of the IDS tower. And look, it's even got a lobby." Nora traced the lines of the miniature bird skyscraper. Incredible! The word, along with other adjectives like amazing or exquisite, was often used to describe the craftsmanship and imagination of Nora Rolvaag's birdhouses. "I know. He just keeps getting better and better." If the look mother and daughter exchanged were a fragrance, it would have a top note of wonder, a middle note of love, and a base note of sorrow. "Hey," said Patty Jane, "I was so busy fending off that ignorant lecher on TV, I can't even remember if I mentioned what's happening tonight." "You didn't," said Nora, "but we've already got about 50 people coming." "Good. Are you?" "I wasn't planning to. I thought I'd—" "Oh, come on," said Patty Jane. "It'll be fun." Chapter 2. The tango. Ah, the tango. It is all about desire. It is all about passion. It is all about control, said the man whose oily black hair was serrated with comb marks. "But whose control?" asked his partner, whose sharp, angular eyebrows gave her an unwavering look of disdain. "Is it the man?"
Sample complete. Ready to continue?